Hello everyone, my name is Dasha Palmanov, and for my home presentation I chose the topic Sexual Deviance of Male Athletes. As I was doing my research, I found myself relating more to articles that were about college students, as I am one too. And you will see that throughout this presentation I talk more about college male athletes and victims that are in college. First, I'm going to start off with explaining what deviance is and a few other terms and definitions that go along with it. Deviance occurs when a person's ideas, characteristics, or actions are deemed to be outside of the normal range of what is acceptable in a society. So sexual deviance would be a sexual behavior that isn't seen as normal in society, such as rape or sexual assault. Now there are two types of deviances. There's formal deviance and there's informal deviance. Formal deviance involves breaking an official written rule or law that is punishable. It can be as bad as theft, murder, assault, or rape, all which are punishable, all in which you break a law and that can cause you to end up in jail or prison. Or it can be breaking a rule in sports. So for example, traveling in basketball, which is punishable by a free throw for the opposing team. So sexual deviance is seen as a formal deviance because rape or sexual assault is punishable by law, as I mentioned. Informal deviance, on the other hand, is a violation of an unwritten rule or a violation of a shared understanding. These violations are not punishable by law, but by informal sanctions administered by others. Some examples of informal deviance would be burping or picking your nose in public. Last term that I'm going to talk about is deviant underconformity, which goes along more with the topic that I have picked. Deviant underconformity consists of actions that involve rejecting or lacking the awareness of norms. Some examples are bar fighting, sexual assault, or referring to a person with a mental disability as a retard. Next, I will give some reasons to why sexual deviance may occur. First is the way males identify themselves. On average, male athletes are more likely than any other students on campus to identify with hypermasculinity. Hypermasculinity is basically an over-exaggeration of a stereotypical male behavior, which is very prevalent in sports, as I will later talk about. Evidence has shown that male athletes are more likely to be confused about consent and admit that they have committed acts of sexual aggression. Moving on to the star status and social power. In an article written by a professor of sociology, she talks about male athletes' star status and their high standings that they seem to have in schools. She writes that their star status gives them plentiful of opportunities to hook up, and that athletes sometimes find themselves following a hookup script that seems to resemble sexual assault. She writes about a hookup culture in which the main goal is to have sexual intercourse. The students will get people drunk with the aim of having sex with them, be sexually persistent, even forceful sometimes. They will pull their interest into a secluded part of parties, away from everyone else, and proceed quickly to sexual intercourse, even if their partner is highly intoxicated, unable to answer for themselves, and/or unconsenting. She also mentions that this social power may make it very hard for peers looking from the outside in to stop a potential assault from happening. Another thing to look at is the background of the athletes, so where they came from and what their environment was like before they came to college, for example. One can look at the culture of the town an athlete is from, the existing local attitudes and beliefs about gender and women who are sexually assaulted, and also what the male athletes' families might think on these topics, the characteristics and actions of their current and previous coaches and school officials, and the separation between the sport team and the rest of the community. The culture of sports is something to take into account as well. Sport culture values, encourages, and rewards aggression, and aggression is part of the stereotypical male behavior when I was talking about hypermasculinity. Athletes transfer this aggression from the field into the social world. This can lead to sexual conquest that inhibits the same kind of just do it mentality that gains them honor on the playing field. Last reason I will talk about is hostesses. I found an example from the Oklahoma State University football program who recruited female hostesses to try and encourage prospective players to join their team. The idea was to put the idea of having women around all the time is how it will always be for them if they come and join and play for their team. A former football player from OSU admitted that there is no other way a woman can come get you to play for football at a school besides sex. This raises the question, are schools perpetuating a culture in intercollegiate athletics that permits objectifying women? And does this play into the pattern of sexual assault and rape that we see coming from male athletes? Now I will talk about the results and consequences. So what happens to a player when a victim comes in, tells their story, and reports a sexual assault or rape? The first thing that can happen, and happens many of the time, is protection. Because sports bring in so much money into a school, and because the behavior of athletes reflect the reputation of the school very publicly, both on and off the field, coaches and school officials will try almost anything in their power to protect the athletes, much more than they would the victim or any other student. In those cases where charges are successfully brought, school officials will try to provide athletes with top-notch legal representatives, which may not always be available to the victims. Next is sentencing. I found a couple of examples of what sentencing for a male athlete can look like. First, I will talk about Brock Turner, who was a former student athlete at Stanford. After being found guilty of raping a woman behind a dumpster, he was only sentenced to 6 months in prison. Second is a scandal that happened at Baylor University, in which the school failed to investigate multiple claims of sexual assault involving players from the football team. Lastly, I will talk about James Winston, who is a college football player at Florida State, who allegedly raped a female student in 2014. There was evidence from the victim's rape kit. However, the school postponed Winston's hearing after he led the team into winning the championship, to win the championship game. And then after that, the charges were ultimately dropped. Of course, there have been some situations in which resulted in some change. In 2009, in a case involving a student raped by an Arizona State University football player, the victim was awarded $850,000 in damages, and the Arizona University system agreed to establish a student safety coordinator for its 3 campuses. There has also been a rise of bystander intervention programs being implemented at colleges and universities, which does help athletes in becoming part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. Now, protecting an athlete is obviously not good for the victim, but it is also not good for the athletes themselves. Because if the athletes start to see how protected they are and the lack of consequences that they may receive, even if they are caught, they might not hesitate to do it again. Now I will move on to talk about the victims of rape or sexual assault, how they are treated when they tell their stories, and what may happen to them. As I talked about earlier, when college athletes get accused of a sexual crime, they get protected by the school. The victims, however, do not get this protection. They may get ignored, get called a liar, or get silenced. In August 2010, a female student reported being sexually assaulted by a Notre Dame athlete. She reported this to the campus police, but they did nothing with this report for 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, the student committed suicide. When victims report assaults by athletes, they are often silenced. Players and fans will try to get the victims to take back their story, or they may just try to not make them tell it in the first place. Some victims never report the assault to campus safety officials because they believe nothing will be done anyway. Now, there are many campus assault prevention programs. I'm sure that you may attended some. And most of the time, these programs put the responsibility for change on the would-be victims. They will tell females not to walk alone, to never accept drinks from strangers, and not to dress provocatively. Because of the way victims get treated by the schools, many times this leads victims to leave the school temporarily, if not, drop out for good. Now I will play a video in which a recent graduate, Cece Carrera, and Set the Expectation campaign founder, Brenda Tracy, share their stories. They talk about what happened to them, how they felt, how they got treated, and what they plan to do about it. Cece Carrera was a normal female student with male athlete friends who she trusted, and she tells her story and her plan to help girls just like her. Brenda Tracy talks about her travels with her campaign and what she learned from visiting different schools and how she plans on spreading awareness.
I loved my school, and then I was raped, and that kind of changed everything. I went to a small liberal arts college that is a D1 school. My freshman year, my first class, there were 6 football players and a soccer player, and they were my best friends. The world was perfect. There was nothing that could hurt me.
Nothing bigger than sports in this country. In 1998, as a young woman, I was gang raped by 4 college football players. The horror for me is I just feel like, how has nothing changed in almost 20 years? The NCAA could have huge impacts on our culture for change, and you see them hesitant. That's not okay.
My junior year ended. I was definitely hanging out with athletes socially, and I felt safe with them. We'd gotten back to the house. I went to sleep in my best friend at the time's room. We started hooking up, which started off as consensually as 2 drunk people can consent. And then at a certain point I told him, stop, I'm tired. I kind of just moved away from him, went to the other side of the bed, and he said no, and got on top of me. I dissociated and froze. I'm watching it happen to myself. I'm not actually the person it's happening to. Eventually I start crying, and it's still going on. And, I don't know what makes the shift happen, but suddenly, I'm me again. And I am just stop, and I grab him, and I push him, and he starts yelling at me. He starts throwing my clothes in my face, and he's like, get the out of this house. I leave, could not tell you how I got home. I didn't completely understand the severity of what had happened to me. I didn't think it was going to impact me the way it eventually did. Just make sure everything's good.
Just over 3 years ago, I came forward with my personal story, and since that time, I've become an activist. Hi, my name is Brenda Tracy. I'm a rape survivor, and I'm also the founder of the Set the Expectation campaign. Started sharing my story on different campuses, and Colgate heard about me and brought me onto their campus to talk about issues of sexual violence. As I was traveling the country and working with different coaches and their teams, I was recognizing that there were some coaches that were standing in front of their players and setting the expectation that certain behaviors were not okay. And then other coaches weren't having these conversations. All of our young people know exactly what kind of grades they need to get, what classes they need to go to be eligible to play sports. What if we did that with behavior? What if this young student knew, if I commit an act of sexual assault or rape, I'm not eligible to play sports? Now we have to talk about consent. Now we have to talk about healthy relationships. Now we have to talk about behavior.
It breaks my heart to think that there are people who have been assaulted who never said anything because they didn't think they were going to be believed for whatever reason that is, and it kills me.
My community was horrible to me. They called me a liar. I received death threats. All this stuff happened to make me go away, and it worked. One of the things that drives the bad decisions we see in athletics is absolutely money. Athletics is what brings money into our colleges, but when you have these contracts and money and alumni, it's kind of a recipe for disaster to make bad decisions. And we're placing money over human life. After coming forward with my story in 2014, an investigation was done. And we found out that at the time, Oregon State University was trying to renovate Parker Stadium. And they needed tens of millions of dollars to do this. And they were courting the Reeser family for money. And they couldn't have a rape scandal on their hands. The worth of my life to those people at that time was the cost of Reeser Stadium. As I travel the country, I look at all these football stadiums. And I wonder who had to suffer for that building.
Before I was raped, I'd already made the decision that I was going to law school. Growing up, I always wanted to be in a profession that could help people. I volunteer full-time with Safe Harbor, which is a local advocacy organization for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. One day, my best friends and I want to start a nonprofit, having a girl gang of women who are so committed to empowering other women and helping other women and educating other women. And I will fight for people as hard as I've fought for myself and as hard as I wish someone would fight for me.
Because there are some of you who probably know a survivor, could be a family member. The majority of sexual violence is committed by men, but it's not all of our male population doing these things, it's 10%. So 90% of our guys are good guys, and that's who I focus on, is the 90% who I think can step up and align themselves with women in this work and be the solution. Let people know you're in the 90%. It's the quickest, easiest way to let people know where you stand. The responses I get from young men are incredible. It's amazing. And for me, it feels like this is why I do the work. It seems like a pretty simple concept. Attach eligibility to behavior. We need the NCAA to step up. Playing sports is a privilege and not a right. Where respect lives, violence can't exist.
Okay. So now we'll talk about what you can do personally to help diffuse a potential assault from happening. Some big steps would be to join a campaign or a clinic to help victims and survivors, as the woman talked about in the video. But there are also very easy steps that anyone can do if they find themselves witnessing a situation. The show you care steps. C is for create a distraction. A is for ask directly. R is for refer to an authority. And E is for enlist others. So create a distraction. Do what you can to interrupt the situation. So you can put yourself into the conversation, cut it off, or change the topic. Or you can, if you're at a party, you can make up an activity that draws everyone in, including those two people, and then ask directly. So you can talk to the person who you think might be in trouble. Ask them questions. Hey, are you okay? Do you want this to happen? Do you need any help? Anything like that. refer to an authority, kind of self-explanatory. You can talk to a security guard, a bartender, or any other employee, or an RA if you are in a college dorm, for example, about your concerns. And don't ever hesitate to call 911 if you are concerned with someone's safety. Enlist others. So if you aren't comfortable with going in and doing any of the other steps, you can always ask others to help you diffuse the situation. You can ask someone who knows the person in the situation to come in and help you talk to them, maybe escort them to the bathroom, ask them questions if they're okay or if not. And last but not least, my reference page. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope you learned a little something new, and we'll try to help in some way if possible. Thank you and stay safe.